Sasha had always loved school. She woke up early, eager to put on her uniform and pack her backpack. But one morning, everything changed. She refused to get dressed, hiding under her blanket, shaking her head when her mother asked what was wrong. At first, her mother assumed it was just exhaustion or a bad day. But as days turned into weeks, Sasha's refusal to return to school became more intense. Her mother tried everything: encouragement, rewards, even gentle discipline, but nothing worked. Sasha clung to her, crying whenever they approached the school gate. It wasn't like her at all. Something was terribly wrong. The once happy girl had become withdrawn, anxious, and fearful. One evening, after hours of comforting and coaxing, Sasha finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the words sent a chill down her mother's spine. "I don't want to go because Mr. Johnson does bad things." Sasha's mother's heart pounded. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" she asked, trying to keep her voice calm. But Sasha hesitated, her little hands gripping the edge of her bed. It was as if she had been holding on to a secret too heavy for her small frame to carry. Slowly, she began to describe uncomfortable moments with her teacher, times when he had called her to stay behind after class, moments when he had stood too close, times when his hands had lingered on her shoulder for too long. She spoke of times she had tried to leave, only for him to block the door with a smile that made her stomach twist. Tears welled up in her mother's eyes. She had always trusted the school to be a safe place. Now, that trust was shattered. How long had Sasha been suffering in silence, afraid to speak up? Her mother hugged her tightly, promising that she would never have to face him again. The next morning, Sasha's mother stormed into the school, demanding an urgent meeting with the principal. As she sat across from him, she laid out everything Sasha had said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. But instead of immediate action, she was met with hesitation. The principal sighed, folding his hands on the desk. "This is a serious accusation," he said. "Are you sure there's no misunderstanding? Mr. Johnson has been a valued teacher here for years." The words felt like a slap in the face. "So you think my daughter is lying?" She shot back, her voice rising. The principal backtracked, claiming they would look into the matter. But it was clear, he wasn't taking this seriously. Realizing that the school was more concerned about its reputation than her daughter's safety, Sasha's mother decided to take matters into her own hands. That same day, she took Sasha to the police station. The officers listened carefully, taking notes as Sasha bravely repeated her story. They assured her mother that an investigation would begin immediately. As word spread, other parents started coming forward. Whispers turned into confessions, and soon, more children admitted they had also felt uneasy around Mr. Johnson. Some shared similar experiences but had been too afraid to say anything. The police wasted no time. They gathered testimonies, checked surveillance footage, and spoke with staff members. The deeper they looked, the more they uncovered. This wasn't just an isolated case, it was part of a larger pattern that had gone unnoticed for years. As the investigation continued, disturbing details about Mr. Johnson surfaced. Years ago, another student had made similar complaints, but the school had brushed them aside, citing a lack of evidence. That child's family had eventually transferred to another school, leaving the truth buried, until now. Sasha's mother was outraged. How many children had suffered because the school had prioritized its reputation over their safety? She demanded answers, but the administration remained silent. Frustrated, she reached out to other parents, organizing meetings and pushing for accountability. The pressure grew too intense to ignore. The school was forced to place Mr. Johnson on leave, but for Sasha's mother, that wasn't enough. She wanted justice, not just for her daughter but for every child who had been silenced. As the case against Mr. Johnson built momentum, he was officially charged. The trial became a media storm, drawing attention to how often institutions protect those in power instead of the vulnerable. Sasha's mother sat in the courtroom, holding her daughter's hand as testimonies were given. One by one, students, parents, and even former teachers stepped forward. Their stories painted a chilling picture, one of a man who had hidden behind his position, using it as a shield to avoid suspicion. Mr. Johnson's lawyer tried to argue that there was no concrete evidence, but the weight of testimonies made it impossible to ignore. It was clear, this was not a misunderstanding. This was a pattern of abuse that had gone unchecked for too long. The day of the verdict arrived, and the courtroom was packed with journalists, parents, and advocates who had followed the case closely. Sasha's mother held her breath as the judge read out the decision. Every second felt like an eternity. When the words "guilty on all charges" echoed through the courtroom, a wave of emotions crashed over her. Relief. Justice. But also, the weight of what her daughter had endured. Mr. Johnson, the once respected teacher, was sentenced to prison, ensuring that he would never have the opportunity to harm another child again. Parents who had doubted the accusations now hung their heads in shame. Teachers who had ignored signs of misconduct began questioning how they had missed it. But the case did more than just bring justice to Sasha, it sparked a conversation. Schools across the district were now under scrutiny. Parents demanded answers. How many other cases had been ignored? How many other children had suffered in silence? Policies began to change. Background checks became stricter. Schools could no longer afford to dismiss complaints. And for the first time, victims felt heard. The trial may have ended, but for Sasha's mother, the fight was far from over. She refused to let this become just another news story that faded away. Instead, she became a fierce advocate for children's rights. She spoke at school board meetings, pushing for mandatory teacher training on student safety. She connected with lawmakers, fighting for stricter policies on handling misconduct. At first, institutions resisted. No school wanted to admit its failures. Administrators worried about lawsuits, reputations, and funding. But Sasha's mother refused to back down. The pressure from parents, media attention, and growing public outrage forced schools to act. New policies were introduced. Teachers underwent stricter screening. Anonymous reporting systems were set up so children could report misconduct without fear. Schools that once brushed concerns aside were now being held accountable. No longer could an institution protect an offender at the expense of a child. Through it all, Sasha watched her mother fight, not just for her, but for every child who had ever been silenced. Her once small voice had sparked a movement, one that would protect generations to come. Even with all the progress, Sasha's mother knew there was still work to be done. The fight for justice didn't end with one case. There were still children out there, afraid to speak up, trapped in systems that failed them. She dedicated herself to advocacy full-time, partnering with organizations that supported survivors. She worked with therapists to create healing programs for children who had been through similar experiences. She helped parents recognize warning signs, ensuring they would never overlook their child's distress. Her efforts inspired others. More families came forward, sharing their own painful stories. Investigations were launched in other schools. Hidden patterns of abuse were finally being exposed. The system that once protected abusers was now being forced to change. Sasha, once a terrified little girl who had been too afraid to speak, now stood beside her mother at events, sharing her journey. She had reclaimed her voice. And in doing so, she had given hope to countless others. This case was a reminder for parents everywhere: always listen to your children. When a child suddenly changes their behavior, refuses to go to school, or shows signs of distress, it's never just a phase. Sasha's mother had almost dismissed her daughter's fears, but by choosing to listen, she uncovered the truth. Schools, authorities, and institutions must be held accountable. Too often, victims are silenced out of fear or disbelief. But as Sasha's story proved, speaking up can break cycles of abuse and protect future generations. No child should ever feel unsafe in a place meant for learning. And no parent should ever have to fight alone to ensure their child's safety. If you believe every child deserves to be heard and protected, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps spread awareness and make a difference.